Hello, fellow writers. Welcome to part 2 of our discussion about commas. In the first part of this lecture, we talked about when to use commas, where they belong, when you use them, how to use them correctly. So we're going to start out this second part of our discussion with some of the times when you should not use a comma. We often sprinkle them in just for the heck of it sometimes, and other times because we think a comma belongs in a certain spot. But these are instances in which we should not use a comma. So the first one we're going to look at says, do not use commas to separate compound verbs. What's a compound verb? Well, as our first sentence here shows, this sentence has two verbs, rumbled and smoked. They rumbled through the city streets and smoked down drag strips. And we've got a comma after streets. It just sort of seems like there should be a comma there for some reason to whoever would have been the writer of this sentence. But the rule says no comma to separate compound verbs. And we've done that. So let's take that comma out of there. It's just not necessary. It serves no purpose. And our sentence works perfectly fine without it. They rumbled through city streets and smoked down drag strips. It's perfectly clear. In fact, the sentence flows a little bit better without the comma. It doesn't stop the reader. Okay, here's another rule. Do not use a comma between a subject and a verb. Just doesn't seem like you would ever do that, does it? But people do. And the reason I think, as we can see in this next sentence, might be it just seems like these first two words in this next sentence sound like they might be an introductory group of words which you would use a comma to separate from the rest of your sentence, but it's not. Indeed, it's the subject. Keeping focused is the subject of that short sentence, and can is the verb, and we've separated the two, the subject and the verb, with a comma. So we need to take that comma out of there, and we have a good sentence that makes sense and flows well. Keeping focused can be difficult. Okay, now here's an elaboration on that sentence, an extension or more information in that sentence. And it kind of shows us an example where sometimes we throw a comma in just because we've used enough words so we think we need to pause a little bit to give the reader a break to digest the words we've already put up there before we finish the sentence. Well, that doesn't make really any sense at all. And this comma violation is the same as the one above. And we need to not violate that rule. So it says keeping focused on driving while simultaneously trying to operate a cell phone, comma, can be difficult. Again, the comma is in the way. It doesn't serve any purpose. It only confuses and interrupts the flow of the sentence, and it works much better when we take that comma out of there. Okay, keeping focused on driving while simultaneously trying to operate a cell phone can be difficult. Very straightforward. Okay, here's another instance in which we do not use commas, and this is a little more complex. It's called the restrictive elements rule, I suppose you could call it. Restrictive elements in a sentence are the elements of a sentence that must be there for the meaning of the sentence to be clear. And in this instance, the restrictive elements are in blue. So we have only nations that recognize the right to free speech and free press, comma, should be eligible for seats on international human rights commissions. And the rule says that part in blue should not be set off by commas. So we're going to take those commas out because the sentence makes no sense without that restrictive element. It does not have the meaning we need to convey and are intending to convey in that sentence. So we take it out. It needs to be, take the commas out. It needs to be joined together. Only nations that recognize a free speech, a right to free speech and free press should be eligible for seats on international human rights commissions. Very straightforward. In our next sentence, the part in blue, students who have a perfect attendance record will earn 3 points for class participation. We need to have that phrase, that restrictive phrase in there in order to have meaning for which students we're talking about. Without that, you'd still have a sentence. It could say students will earn 3 points for class participation, but it doesn't have any meaning because it doesn't define and articulate the distinction we're trying to convey. So no commas to set off restrictive elements in your sentence. Okay, another rule, use a comma between coordinate adjectives not joined with and. Coordinate adjectives not joined with and do not use a comma between cumulative adjectives. Well, we need to find out the difference between coordinate adjectives and cumulative adjectives. Coordinate adjectives are adjectives, as it says there, that can be joined with and. So look at our first sentence here. Roberto is a warm, gentle, affectionate father. Okay, warm defines or modifies the word father. Gentle modifies the word father, and affectionate modifies the word father, all defining the kind of father Roberto is, and they stand alone. They could be joined by and. Roberto is a warm and gentle and affectionate father. So coordinate adjectives. So we separate them with commas. Now in the next sentence we have 3 large gray shapes with commas introduced between the adjectives move slowly toward us. But these adjectives are cumulative adjectives. Cumulatively, they define the word, the noun. So shapes is our noun, and gray defines shapes, but large does not define shapes. So if we take this comma out, we can see how this is going to be conveyed more clearly when we remove the commas. We're talking about 3 large gray shapes. So we're talking about shapes. They're gray shapes. What kind of gray shapes are there? There are large gray shapes. And how many large gray shapes do we have? We have 3. So they cumulatively define the word shapes. They add to each other. So here's another example. Coordinate adjectives. Should patients with severe, irreversible brain damage be put on life support? They independently define brain damage. Those 2 modifiers, severe and irreversible, could both be separated or joined by the word and. Should patients with severe and irreversible brain damage be put on life support systems? They function independently as modifiers, severe brain damage, irreversible brain damage. Cumulative adjectives. In this example, Ira ordered a rich chocolate layer cake. Okay, now each of those does not independently modify the word cake, each of those adjectives. So we need to take out those commas. Rich chocolate layer cake. So we're talking about a cake. What kind of cake? A layer cake. What kind of layer cake? A chocolate layer cake. And what kind of chocolate layer cake? A rich chocolate layer cake. All of those cumulatively work together to tell us the kind of cake we're talking about. But they cannot stand independently, therefore we do not use commas between the adjectives. Okay, there's some more examples of commas where they should be used, where they shouldn't be used, and when they're used, how they should be used. When in doubt, look up the rule. Don't make the mistake. When you make mistakes in your writing, whether it's comma use or word usage or grammatical mistakes, you distract your reader, and you want your reader to pay attention to what you have written, not to your mistakes.